So, Mike, we're back. It took us a year to get another meeting.
1 year later.
One
Yeah.
year later. So now I'm not gonna let you go until we have this list done. We got halfway through. Last time we did some more of the sound design sort of thing, but now I want to get into the technical side because having modded um, my mod for Portal 2, I've worked with all of these systems that I know you also were involved with. So I'm very curious to hear about them. First of all, completely unrelated though, this thing here.
Oh, nice. All right.
These speakers are magical,
Aren't
and
they incredible? I know. People don't talk about those nearly enough. They are unbelievable, in my opinion.
I
You
think
know.
people do talk about them. Like that is one of the standout features of this thing. Like, okay, it's got it was the best thing ever. Like in terms of the VR quality, it's already super old by now. Gotta wait for that Deckard whenever
Yeah.
that comes. But those speakers, like when I put it on for the first time and played Aperture Hand Labs, which I know Valve didn't make, I think it was some other team.
Yeah.
But those speakers were just, holy crap, this sounds like it's from absolutely everywhere. Did you have
It's
something to do with that sort of system, or what was your thoughts?
um, I helped, Emily Ridgway was largely responsible for those. I helped her in the early phases of kind of figuring out how to navigate Valve and how to navigate sort of the technical world and finding people and sort of like she had this great idea of a helmet that like so that was speakers all the way around you, which I still think is probably the best idea. Or
Was
I
that
mean,
the
there
Vader?
were what's that?
I heard
Yeah,
about the Vader.
the Vader, right? Yeah. No, that wasn't that, but it was
Okay.
that idea because we were, how do you get the surround situation sorted? And and then there's also other conversations of how do you like get kind of because you can do a surround system uh, and then stand in the middle of it, and so you could, in theory, with floating speakers, have sounds move to different speakers depending on how far they are from you, and get more of that sort of experience, which you could still do. That would be an amazing thing to. I still think that would be probably the most effective version of it. I don't know. There's a ILM. I went to ILM at one point. They had an experience, a Star Wars experience that was, VR, but you were in a room with speakers in it, right? And it was really compelling, except for all the speakers were far from you. And so as soon as you got near to R2D2 or whatever, the sound was not coming
Hmm.
from the right location. And so I kind of went down that rabbit hole. I mean, this was, that early VR era. Everyone was coming to us with HRTF solutions, surround solutions. There was Atmos, and then there's also even Myers, and there's Constellation System, and all that. So I was working with Emily a bunch in that era, just reviewing all the different technologies, all the different concepts. Even because our VR guys were even um, not super clear on how do I put it. There was a certain amount of them who, because they were working in VR, they were running sort of their demos and whatnot straight out of like code, like executables, right? That they generated, and the geometry was being, and they weren't really using game engines at first. And so they're like, well, we need a complete solution to sound. Um, and it took us a really long time to understand that they were just like playing sounds in C code, you know what I mean, and not using an engine with all the available tools and things. Like they're like, we need to be able to spatialize. It's like, well, that has actually existed since the mid 90s. Like it's not a new thing. In
Yeah.
fact, HRTF and all that stuff had too. And so it took us a while to kind of educate ourselves on what the state of things, what the new state of things potentially looks like, how it relates to the old state or the current at that time state of things, and then educate the people around us what that means too, right? Like I said, like kind of going, well, we've actually solved 90% of these problems. It's just now we have a new level of fidelity that we need to achieve. And there were certain headphones that were better than others. There was one, and I'm never going to remember the name right now, even though we hired one of their engineers last year. But it had like multiple speakers in it. You know, it had like speakers kind of coming from behind your ears and that kind of thing. But so long story short, it also turns out that headphones and headphone companies and the technology around headphones is kind of a black art. You know, there's not a lot of people out there who actually understand how, you know, speakers work. Most headphone companies are just sourcing, you know, the um, the drivers from probably somewhere in China. You know, um, certainly most commercial. You know, we went to Sennheiser and the big ones, Sennheiser, Bose, visited those companies, and that was interesting because they have more in-house technology and whatnot. We talked to the Audis guys, or Odyssey, however you want to say it, and they were the ones who really introduced us to the concept of magnetic planar, right? So the flat, moving flat
Mm-hmm.
surface. And the idea there's you have a grid of magnets, so the whole thing moves instead of the traditional cone, which has a magnet in the middle, and it pushes the center of the cone out like that, which creates a radial pattern, which means that if you're at any kind of a weird angle, it really affects how the quality of sound. So, and it also really loses low end if you move away from if you don't have the can, you know what I mean? And so, but their technology was really expensive because they're a really small company and whatnot. But they really helped us to understand that. So then I went out. Emily was on vacation. I went out and found some old Sony magnetic planers that were pretty much discontinued, and just kind of made a quick prototype just to see. In fact, I bought like motorcycle headphones, a whole bunch of different types of headphone drivers that weren't um, that that weren't in a enclosed space, and just kind of to prove to myself that this was even not a waste of time. You know what I mean? That this idea could work, and those Sony's worked within reason. And then she came back and totally just took it and went. Found a company in Seattle that had kind of come either designed some new material science or had found some, utilized it, and they were the ones who came up with these drivers that are really small and lightweight. Like the Audi's ones are really heavy and large and take a lot of energy. And so these guys, yeah, they came up with these drivers that are powerful enough. Those things go pretty loud and they're light. And then by then, Emily was like, it was her project. So she was off and running. And then I kind of backed out and, at Valve, everybody's got tons of great ideas. I mean, this wasn't my idea to begin with, but really the hardest part is getting it across the line. And she just totally nailed that one. Dealt with all the BOM costs and the sourcing of the materials and all those things, which is all really challenging. And I moved over to Alyx, probably around that time, and had the pleasure of designing for him, which was fucking great. Because when you're working on a flat screen or two, whatever, three, whatever, just a normal video game, you've got all these problems of, are people in headphones? Are they in speakers? How many speakers? Are they using a receiver? Are they, like you can choose what your speaker setup is in the game, but then, you have no idea if it matches what their home setup is,
Yeah.
right? So there's a lot of challenges there. And to design for those cans, specifically those cans, God, they are so good. Um, was a real joy. I mean, it was not a joy to design for alpha hardware product. Luckily we had the God, what was the first one called?
The Vive?
The Vive. I had a Vive, so I could always just like pull like switch over from the index to the Vive and work there. But then eventually, once the index, I mean, it sounds way better, and B, it looks way better. But man, there were days where it was just crashing my whole setup, and
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, I don't have my VR setup set up right now. I was just thinking about that a couple days ago because I mean, I just saw my gear and I was like, oh, I've got the poles and the whole thing. Um, and I was like, I really miss hanging out in Alyx, like spending time in that space. And um, yeah,
Alex's sound is you like it is so fun to hear that like so in depth about that story, even though you weren't the one who manufactured them, but you were certainly involved. Because yeah, these I've obsessed over all the time because they're just so magical. You put them on, you don't notice anything is there. I've played with the Vive for years with headphones, and I found that switching to something like this where like this is not even open back; it's even further. It's just not on your ear.
yeah.
Um, it really makes it easier to spend a lot of time in VR.
Yeah.
Did you have the
Well,
same experience?
we actually tested again, like I said, there was a window where I was working with Emily just trying to determine, it's a Valve thing. So it's like, is this even a good idea? Let's not go all the way down the path of, like when I found those Sonys, some biz dev guy, who I love, if in case you're listening, but got really excited and went and found like 200 sets of these headphones and ordered them. And I was like, oh, wait, what? What did you do? We don't need those. Like, that's not like, let's figure out if this is a good idea first. But one of the tests we did is Emily built sort of a rig, that sat on your head, or no, it was a helmet or something. And so you could kind of wear the Vive and then have these floating headphones. And we tested it on people, brought people in cold just to see. And one of the big concerns was that it wouldn't, you'd be letting the outside world in, right? And I've seen a lot of play tests at Valve, including hardware and all kinds of cockamamie ideas that we come up with. And I have never seen a play test go as well as that set of tests. Like 201, everyone, even the most skeptical people came away going, holy, what was that? Like, that was amazing. And the main thing is that everyone said it was more immersive. And that's the thing I found too, is that you don't have anything touching you, which is really, I think is nice. Because it doesn't distract you in a way of like, there's something unnatural going on here. But being able to hear the world around you, the actual air and cars or whatever happens to be the ambient noise that's going on around you, I believe, relieves you from sort of, it's like keeps it natural. And so you're kind of able to tune it out anyway, but it's like, it means you're not worried. You're not like, oh, I'm in this space and I'm isolated from the space, right? It's like you're still part of the space, but you're in a different, I know it sounds completely contradictory, but I believe what it does is it relieves your pre-conscious brain from having to be aware of the world around you in a way that allows you then to completely become absorbed in the artificial world that's being presented to you.
I totally agree. I like, yeah.
It is really remarkable. In fact, I just was on, somebody actually has, they're presented as sports headphones, but I saw some because we were like, we should just make headphones. I mean, we did our own like 3D printed versions. I have some upstairs.
I would have loved that. I wanted that.
Yeah, they're really cool.
These were the best headphones I had for such a long time.
Shit, I can't remember where I saw some commercial company has, and they're sort of like, it's like a normal headphone thing here, but then there's a ring, and this is the problem, is how to do it. There's a ring that kind of sits on your head, but the drivers are floating just like those. And I was like, oh yeah, I thought maybe a U-shaped thing would be good. In fact, that's how ours is. It's like a U-shaped thing that sits on your head. and then it hangs down there. But anyway, yeah, great technology, really, really great technology, and really fun to design for. There was a lot of other tech that went into Alyx too that made like why it sounds. I mean, I agree. I think it sounds great. Like, even having worked on it, I feel comfortable saying that. There's a we developed a lot of tech that was really super useful for the mix, right? Helping us kind of manage and control the mix. Um, we Jay Staley finished the new backend, which Portal 2 doesn't. Portal 2 has the prototype to the Source 2 style engine that we have. That part of it, the backend, didn't come online, and Alyx was the first. Well, I think it was. I mean, it was in Dota first. Dota has always been the test for Source 2 for us, and I think it made part of that engine made its way into CS:GO as well. But it was Alyx was the first place where we authored to the back half. So our Source 2, and I don't know how much you know about Source 2. It's basically like Max MSP. There's, Max, I don't know if you're familiar with Max, but it's kind of a node based connected. It's kind of
Yeah,
like
yeah.
Reactor or something.
I know what you mean. I have these questions too.
Yeah. So,
But I talked about Steam Audio, maybe.
oh, yeah. Well, and Steam Audio was the other really big component. The HRTF is great. And we acquired them probably around the time that I was joining Alyx, and otherwise known as HLVR. And they we really they were our favorites. The Impulsonic product was our favorite, model, because we had tested all of them, and there were only so many PhDs. Two sets of them came from North Carolina, UNC. They have a big acoustics program there, physics and whatnot. And so they spent those couple of years shipping HRTF in CS:GO, and so they had to, in a real world test environment with a lot of feedback, coming from CS:GO players.
That was
And
pretty cool.
so, yeah, by the time we got it, it had really been refined, and the full frequency band support, and really doing a good job of leaving the filters off of the parts of the frequencies that aren't necessary, like the low end and whatnot. And so the HRTF was killer by the time we got to it. And then Steam Audio's, the reverb system, was just coming online. Like, it was pretty, it was pretty late in the game that it was fully functioning. I spent a lot of time with them working on materials, and there's virtually no editing. There's a handful of knobs you could kind of turn when you were baking your maps and whatnot. But you could set up a bunch of parameters on the materials. And so I went through and, did a pass of that. And man, once we got it set up, it really was just worked. Occasionally there'd be an area where maybe it wasn't quite right. But for the most part, it was super. Yeah, it was a pretty big part of the compelling nature of it. In the game where you're at the energy, the first energy tower, that I forget what we called it, that sends the
Yeah.
Vort energy up to the vault. It was the first time I kind of it was sort of a test, but it was mostly, I thought it was, I gotta be cool. Like, I was working with Tristan Reedford, who I'd worked with on other projects, where we kind of get together and kind of animation and sound and music becomes a thing, like the singing turrets. And he was like, yeah, there's this thing, and there's all these wires, and I kind of want to have them play like they're, an instrument, like resonating. And I was like, cool, like that sounds great. And it's how it has those fingers on them. And so it kind of was this, I initially set it up so it was this electrical music thing. But the thing I didn't realize, the first time I got in the headphones and went in and kind of walked over and looked at it, is that the HRTF was on, and I like lifted my head back, and it was like, holy shit! Like you can hear the height of the audio, like it, and because in VR, probably the very first time I did a test pre-Vive, and our very, very, very first demo was in a room with fiduciaries all over the wall or whatever they're called. And I remember the thing is tilting your head back, that scale of height was such a kind of mind-blowing thing. And the very first time I did it with that wall of sound, because it's kind of, it's electrical, so it's got that full bandwidth thing, which really, really works well with HRTF because the filter sweeps on it fully. I was just like, oh shit, this is so cool. And so then I designed around it, and so there's a lot of stuff like that where there are sounds purposely playing from up high, so that you can.
Was about to say that, yeah, so often you use sound to sell the scale of VR even more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So
yeah, those were kind of the things that really heavily contributed. It was also, I mean, when I think about it, there were other games that have used the Source 2 engine native as opposed to being ported. But they were, it was Underlords and Artifact. And those were not really immersive games, am I missing something? I mean, we had a few that didn't ship.
I mean, the Knuckles Mundas demo.
What's that?
The Knuckles for the VR controller, just the Mundas demo.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like I helped them with some things, but I don't recall. Wasn't that Unity, I think?
That was the lab was Unity, but I think that was Source. Maybe it was.
No, it might have been. Yeah, I didn't really like. I don't. Maybe.
Oh, there's the Steam Deck Aperture Desktop.
Oh yes, of course. But that was after Alyx.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Desktop was after Alyx. So that's the thing, is like, I think Alyx HLVR was the first like project that was fully, not the first, like I said, Artifact, Underlords those were the first projects that were authored in HLVR. I mean, in Source 2. But I think Alyx was the first one that we really, went to town and really pushed all the tech and
you'd expect it's Half-Life.
Yeah, okay, exactly.
Last time, I was surprised how much you fanboyed over Kelly Bailey. Because I didn't know much about him, but I've since watched the 25-year Half-Life anniversary video.
Isn't that good? Yeah.
And yeah, like how much stuff he just did on that project. Not only sound, but also levels and all of that. I totally get you.
Yeah.
And related to that, I learned about a DSP sound system which was made by him. That was like the earliest stuff of making dynamic sounds. I even had to touch that system in Revolution. I made a custom one. It's a strange file format, but it works. Do you have anything to say about that? Did you use that, tweak that? Was that still a part, or was it mainly?
Oh yeah, I used it a lot.
Yeah, it's still used.
In fact, I have a copy of. I mean, I have one of those devices that it's based on, which is, I believe, an Eventide. I'm gonna forget. I'm not very good with gear names. It's like a H4000 or something like that. I have that box, which I used on the music in Alyx specifically to give it sort of the sound of Kelly's, work, because he had one of those, which is what he based the Source 1 engine on. But yeah, no, that file too. You've then seen the things where it says, "Don't touch this, don't change anything." Yeah.
Every time, CS:GO, flashbang, don't touch this, whatever. This makes the beeping sound.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No. I used it a lot, and because it was, like most of the Source 1 engine, it was built and a lot of the features and some really oddball ones went in specifically for Half-Life 2, right? And so there's like really weird things that would happen, like, sound behaving strangely because you're under an awning with an opening in front of it. Like, and somewhere in the engine, it's testing for that very specific case. And so, yeah, I did a lot of work in there. Because I came on with the SFM people. Like I said, I came from film, so I was originally,
Oh yeah, were you a VFX artist?
yeah, I had worked in Lord of the Rings and the Matrix films and
Hmm.
a few others, Catwoman and Spider-Man and whatever. But Bay Rate, who ends up designing the SFM, he went to Valve specifically to do that. And he is a good friend. He's the one that got me down to New Zealand to work on the Lord of the Rings,
Hmm.
and so he convinced me to come to Valve, but originally as a animator, and like a director, because that was my domain at the time. Um, but I was shifting right around that same time. I was like, no, 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 I'm not. I'm moving out of that realm. I want to go into audio and music. Anyway, so long story short, I was there primarily at the beginning, just doing those shorts, like all the TF2 things. But the second I got there, you know, they extended Portal, the whole second half of Portal. And Kelly was too busy to do the music for it. So I stepped in and did music and helped with the sound,
Hmm.
some of the sound. Um, and and then, obviously there was the TF2, but I had already been working on Left 4 Dead, but primarily just over the fence, with music. And but then when we bought Turtle Rock, uh, the development all came in house, right? And that's then someone was like, "Hey, can you just come be the lead on this project?" And I said yes, obviously. And but what that meant is then suddenly, I was faced with the Source One audio engine, um, and there's pretty great community documentation on it out there. But being in house, I just went and read the whole engine, because I know I'm a pretty capable coder. Um, and so I went and read the whole engine and designed some new features specifically for Left 4 Dead. Like the mixed layer system was something that I added that comes from animation. It's a standard animation sort of approach to handling things. Um, and I basically, because I needed to be able to easily change a mix from you're playing a game with all the sounds to you're being pounced by a hunter,
Hmm.
and I want everything to go away but the music and the horror gore sounds, and so that, I didn't go all the way to town, but I added that feature. I had to make a bunch of changes to yes, um, the DSP file presets, right? Which is an interesting problem because, those presets, you can choose them in a soundscape. And this is all Source One. So I have to preface this with, I haven't touched Source One. And, well, I mean, I've probably touched it on some, going back and fixing some odd thing here or there, but, it's been over 10 years, right? So I
Hmm.
probably am forgetting. Um, but that system, you can select a DSP preset specifically in a soundscape, and I can't remember if we added that later or if that was already a feature. But for the most part, most games was using the ADSP system, the automatic DSP system, which is a thing that casts rays out. And there's a convar, so you can see it all happening in real time. But as you move through a space, it casts out rays and figures out what kind of space you're in. If you're under a weird awning situation, and then kind of selects the two, I think it's the two nearest presets to the sort of material slash size space you're in,
Hmm.
interpolates them together, and then uses those settings as a as a as parameters for your DSP settings where you are listener. It's all listener based. There's no source based DSP in, well, that's not entirely true, but for the most part, let's just say there's no source-based DSP in Source One. And so, yeah, so you want to go tweak those settings. You can't really say, hey, I'm in this space, I want to tweak the settings, because those settings are always an interpolation of two different spaces, right? And then if you're in a space that's, let's say, like a HVAC, thing, that's going to be primarily the one setting that's specifically for HVAC. Although if you're at the end of it, you could get a little smattering of another setting. So like if you're like, okay, if I change this one, it'll affect this combination that this one situation has. But then when you go and get an HVAC, you just screwed up your HVAC, right? So that's why there's that thing in there that says, don't touch this, don't change these settings. But yeah, I figured that all out and, learned how to use it. And I added some features here and there. I added a bunch of features to soundscapes, but this is where it kind of gets a little blurry, because that stuff, the Portal 2 is a prototype to Source 2. And so there's a lot of Source 1 still there functioning, and the Source 2 stuff is just sound events and the stacks that they use to drive the behaviors. And so that's a weird zone there. But and also Left 4 Dead, there was a lot of server to client communication stuff I had to do, because I wanted to be able to, like, when you die in Left 4 Dead, you suddenly are spectating other players. Yeah. And so I wanted to make it so that you could, when you're suddenly spectating somebody, you would get whatever music is playing for them exactly as it's playing for them, right? So I had to start, tracking the status of different sound types on the server, so that everybody, or I can't remember how I did it, to be totally honest. It could be that I'm communicating all of those things to every client, so the client's keeping track of all the other clients at the same time, so that then when you jump over, it like swaps in, it devirtualizes those playing, sound. They were called game sounds, as you know, but I now call them sound events because that's what Source 2 is. But anyway, yeah, there was a lot. I got pretty deep into the engine in Left 4 Dead 1 and 2. Sorry about that. So Left 4 Dead 2 was more of the same, but at the same time, so Swarm was happening, Dota was happening, right? Like Dota wasn't a released product at that time. And so I'm talking Left 4 Dead 2 era. I'm just talking. I'm just going to tell you stories. Yeah, because we're kind of talking tech, right? We're talking source technology.
I do want to get into the operator stacks a bit more.
Yeah, and I'll tell you why we did it this way. And it is that, when you've got, at the time, 30 zombies was a big deal. You know what I mean? You got 30 entities running around, all making different sounds. Mm-hmm. And so the way our memory model was working was like a crazy cache system, because we had a lot of little sounds that would get replayed. So, as you're playing sounds, they were all getting first in, last out, sort of first in, first out caching, FIFO caching. But then like Swarm happened, and that was like this weird, isometric view thing. And then Dota was happening, which was its own MOBA situation. And I was realizing, between the zombie thing, the first person shooter thing, zombie thing, multiplayer online games, isometric multiplayer games, isometric, single player games, that we would never really, it would not behoove us to make the same mistake that we had made with the Source 1 engine by designing everything specifically for a type of game. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That we would almost certainly going forward need to be able to adapt to whatever, right? Like, let's say a card game, for example, or VR. as it turned out to be fairly prescient. And so we looked at the spectrum of ideas, which is all the way on one side you have like Wise, which is middleware with heavy UI and really they've got some kind of version of variables and communication with the game engine, but relatively inflexible, right? But handles easy things really, really well and really simply. I mean, easy. I know Damien's probably out there going, oh, what's he saying? It's great. It's great for 90% of companies and products out there that are doing it. But if you need to be able to radically switch how your engine behaves based on, say, switching over to VR and do it quickly and in agile fashion, which is Valve's sort of MO for how we work, we were like, we need to be at the other end of the spectrum. And all the way at the other end of the spectrum is no system and it's just code. But then everything is hand done and it's too much work. And then one step in is scripting. And we definitely looked at scripting. But having worked in animation on big systems with data flow, right? Like animation is something that typically particularly if you look at effects animation and whatnot, you don't want, if thens, you don't want brittle switches, right? I'd worked a bunch in fuzzy logic and those ideas where the data is always just moving, right? You use a lot of curves and a lot of flow like that. And so you go one step back more towards the middle and you end up with like a visual programming language of sorts, right? It's not quite a programming language. It's more of, again, data flow design. And so that's how we landed on that idea. And I put the prototype together in 1 month between Left 4 Dead 2 and Portal 2. So I was like, okay, Left 4 Dead 1 was a crunch. It's the only time Valve has literally shipped a game and shipped a sequel within a year, to my knowledge, right? Maybe early days. Yeah, I mean, it literally was just like, most of my time was spent trying to figure out which content to change to the new one and not paint myself into a corner so I need to change too much content. You know what I mean? That was kind of the biggest challenge there.
How was working on the stuff for the Midnight Riders? What was that like?
Oh, that was so fun. That was kind of one of the classic Valve things where we were working on that map and, it was just, I was in the room and someone's like, hey, we have this amphitheater thing. And should we do a rock band? And I was like, yeah, totally do a rock band. And Jeremy, quickly did concept art for the Midnight Riders, and then Chet was in the studio recording with the coach, I think, and he said, Coach made up those lyrics, right? Stand next to the mountain, whatever that business is. And then they're like, well, could you, we have this, this Southern kind of, classic rock band. Can you put this together? And I was like, sure. And that was literally probably also like a weekend, I just sat down, wrote it. My friend Greg, who's a great singer, was kind of perfect for it. I had tried to hire a friend's band, they're called Dirty Power, what a great band. But I don't think they quite understood what it was I was asking for. They're kind of rock band. They're like, what, you video games? What? But that's so in my wheelhouse. I grew up in the 70s, right? So in Montana on top of it. So I have, I have firsthand Kegger, all the bad things experiences with heavy classic rock. Anyway, we threw that together pretty fast. Yeah. And it kind of turned into a whole viral thing, which is great, and we were able to, Save Me Some Sugar was,
I thought
the
was
website
and everything.
The website. Yeah. I still would love to. I was hoping that Left 4 Dead would make a comeback at some point so that we could do, there was an era where Paris, they had those great zombie walks that were they went to town, really good cosplay zombie stuff. And I wanted to do kind of a show where the Midnight Riders would actually come out and play, Which would be a challenge finding the people who look the same. Because I mean, I drums. That was Jason Rader on drums, who's in Neurosis and Sleep, and he's a legit metal drummer, good friend of mine, and then Greg Dale on vocals, and I played everything else. So I'd have to find a band, but yeah, that was so fun. Left 4 Dead 2 had a bunch of cool problems like the storm, like weather, and there was the foliage on there was like a whole bunch of other issues that were kind of more game development things we had to solve from an audio standpoint, but so between Left 4 Dead 2 and Portal 2, I threw together this, the basics of a node-based system with enough nodes to the most granular I could get. The reason being not because granular is good. In fact, granular makes those graphs kind of hard to read, and it makes it's a little less efficient than it needs to be. But what I wanted to do is by having it be super granular and then replicate the Source 1 engine in with those nodes. What that meant is that I would have all the nodes I could possibly need to implement whatever I want at some point in the future, right? Meaning a prototype. Like you can go write an operator and you can put the whole of Source 1's engine in it and then just provide parameters to the operator and just have an operator, right? And that would have been the fastest, most efficient way to do it in some regards, but it wouldn't be setting myself up for flexibility down the road, right? So the idea was to go and build Source 1 in a stack so that you could really see clearly how it functions and make it transparent. This is the other thing is Source 1 was, because it was a monolithic piece of C code, it was insanely not transparent. It was super opaque, really hard to figure out what's going on, right? Like why the sound's not playing, whatever. And as setting breakpoints in code in sound is really hard. Like, it's like, because also you've got a lot of other sounds playing too. So you got to wait till the sound's playing, hit the breakpoint, and then sort through however many other sounds. So usually you got to have a lot of spew and print Fs kind of stuff. And so I designed it primarily originally with a lot of printfs, but over the years now we have tools. But that was the prototype, and that's what you would have faced in your mod. So like it was basically the gist there is that we moved the definitions from game sounds to sound events. Sound events live on the client, right? In the old days, they lived on the server, and when you played a sound, you'd crack that game sound, figure out what it is, package up a little string of the wave file name. That's why you have the little symbols at the front, right? And send that over the wire. And then the client would get that and go, I play this thing this way because it's got the symbol on it. I flipped the script on that, the sound events load on both ends, but the client then has all the data that you need to make behavioral decisions, on the client and not have to communicate with the server to understand what the intent of the sound is, like how loud it should be, for example, and so that's the big shift that happened in that first phase, and then the stacks, so that there was bespoke behavior. Right. And it took me years to realize, like, oddly, initially, the whole idea was the stack replicates the audio engine from Source 1 in the stack. And then, because that becomes the authoring surface for behaviors, I kind of lost sight that it's actually an audio engine. Like a stack is an audio engine, pretty much. It's not handling the munging. It's the Mac side of the MS. It's not the MSP side. It's just the behavioral game interface side. But that behavioral side is a full engine. Like it's occlusion. It's spread, it's fall off, it's all those things. And so it took me a while to kind of realize when some audio artists are having a hard time understanding it. It's like, oh, right. Well, that's because it's a whole engine. Like, not the DSP side of it, but the behavioral side. Mm-hmm. And so yeah. Anyway, there you go. Now you can ask questions. That's the history. That's the history of it, pretty much. Not including the last 10 years of development and the Source 2 side, right? Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. You did touch a lot of the questions I have here. But so yeah, you talk about it being a node system. Now, 10 years ago, there was the Steam Dev Days 2014. I don't know if you remember that.
Did I speak at it?
Yeah. There's a video on YouTube, and you showed a screenshot of a node editor. I've never seen that. Like that doesn't come with any tools or anything.
That is probably, I'm sorry, I don't really remember.
I could show you a picture
Oh yeah, if you want to show me a picture, I can probably tell you what it is. It's so there are two systems. There's the sound operator system, which is my side of the fence. And then there's the vMix system, which is Jay's side, Jay Stelly, legend. And that side is the DSP side. It has, it does actual mixing, like it actually changes the bits and whatnot. Oh, let's see, hold on. And his is also a graph system. Oh yeah, look at that. I have no idea where this comes from. I think this is because, oh yeah, I wrote this. That's so funny. When we were originally making the sound event system, in fact, I think in Portal 2, you could actually define a stack within the sound event. In Dota, it was like that for a long time too. That prototype system, CS:GO had that too, where you'd say sound event's just a named wrapper around some parameters, right? Like that's all it is, just a wrapper. But at that time, we were making it extra flexible so that the sound event was actually just a named wrapper around a stack. And so you could build your whole own stack within that sound event.
Yep.
Right. Yeah. And so, but normally what you do is import or reference a stack. I can't remember if we had the difference between import and reference yet, but, and so, it was even more insanely flexible and powerful. But it also means what we learned having to port these things over time is then you kind of just don't know anything about any sound event without going and reading the whole thing. And it makes it, something like a system like this. It's like Blueprint, right? Same thing is you kind of end up with these, the complexity is the breadth of the surface area you have to deal with. It's like, even with stacks, if you look at HLVR, I don't even know if you can, but if you were to go and look, we have a lot of stacks that do a lot of stuff, right? And so unless you're kind of familiar with them, it can be hard to navigate. And that's standard. It's just standard for this type of tool set. I saw it in film all the time, and especially if you don't have an editor. Anyway, back to that image. When we were making a sound event editor, it was still the case that the sound event had a graph within it. And so the original sound event editor, you'd open the sound event and be like, bloop, here's your graph, right? And I think in that process, we also came to realize like, oh, that's just too much. Like, let's just have a sound event wrap. And so that's Kelly Bailey helped us with that. We were working on that together at that time. And what we decided to do was instead add a node to every graph called the public node. and you put all the fields in there that you want exposed to the world. So then a sound event is just a named wrapper that has some hard-coded fields like type, and the type is the stack. And so once you specify the type, it looks at the stack and goes, what's your public operator, takes that, populates it with all the fields. And so those are the fields you can change within the sound event, and so that editor no longer exists.
I was wondering about that. Did it ever, because in Portal 2, the sound operator stack file has code comments in it. So that tells me that this editor wasn't there when Portal 2 was made.
That's right.
So I was wondering if it ever like was in the product, if it is in Source 2, because I haven't modded Source 2 ever.
No. We have one now. It's just now becoming an editor. It's been a viewer for years now. But it is becoming an editor finally. Ironically, for a long time, there was pushback against having an editor because you would lose the comments, right? Obviously, we now have enough of a kind of node editing system. I mean, here's the thing, and there are colleagues of mine who would agree or disagree, but there are definitely, I think, more that would acknowledge that, coming from the film world, node-based systems have been around forever, right? It's just a super powerful way to do certain types of projects and processes that protects, like one of the reasons we didn't go with scripting, for example, and scripting's all over the place in film too, but once you kind of step into scripting, you're expecting the artist to be able to manage garbage collection, and there's all kinds of technical problems that get in the way, and it's all just text. Second, you kind of get into a node-based system. You can have a tool. Anyway, the game world had not really made that transition when I started at Valve. So it's been kind of a long-running conversation with film people and then the game people kind of going, even though, Hammer is essentially an entity, or it's a node-based system. You just never look at it that way. Maya is a dependency graph, right? So we didn't really have a ready set tool. Now there's all kinds of graphs happening, right? Including the back end of the audio system, which is a graph, but it's of a different type because it's handing audio. You know what I mean? And so the ins and outs are kind of a given. It's just audio. And then there's some control values that move through it as well. But it's running at, whatever, 512, the buffer rate, 512 samples of, 48K, whatever that frame rate that turns out to be. It's going faster, almost certainly. And so I forget what the question was. Oh, but but so yes, we do have some editors. The sound event editor was the primary one, which you probably also don't have access to. But we also now we have a graph editor, and then we have the vMix editor, which is a full-fledged graph editor, but for audio. At the end of the day, I know sometimes mods, your mod is super professional. And so, but mods can feel unprofessional. Therefore, it's like, we'll get in there and we'll be scrappy with the tool. We don't care.
It was perfectly fine to work with these tools, but it got me wondering when I saw that picture. So in some other, I don't know where you said it. Maybe it was in the same Steam Dev days. I couldn't find it again. You talked about almost returning back to MIDI, like with the dynamic music, playing sound sort of almost like MIDI. You were very vague.
So here's the power of a system like this is, the downside is it's not easy to use necessarily. There's a lot of parts to it that you can put together in different ways, but you can put them together in different ways. So I have a system. The system that you use has a thing called tracks, right? That made the transition into Source 2. Tracks being play something to a named track, and therefore then you can play a new thing to that same track and by playing it, it can either automatically stop the thing that's on the track and play the new thing. So you don't have to manage the old thing. You're just, the track can only have one thing, or it can say, oh, I need to play. Oh, but I need to wait. This track is set up so that I need to wait for a sync point, right? And the thing that's playing has sync points on it, or quantized points, however you want, whatever you want to call it. And then it sits there and waits until it's time to go on the track. It's track. I still have that in Source 2. It's easy to add these sorts of features when you have an open system like this. But I also have a sequencer. I have a sampler. I have, MIDI things that you can load in as MIDI files, and they can play samplers. They can also just play sound events. And so, like, the idea of using MIDI again sounds like the idea is to move back to beeps and boops,
Yeah, but no.
But that's, I mean, there's charm there too, obviously. Look at
I mean,
Portal,
what more do you need a Portal? Yeah.
Yeah. But the idea was more like, like if you're doing orchestra, you're mocking up in MIDI playing samples. And that's probably the most distant from actually just using MIDI. If you're doing some kind of electronic soundtrack in your DAW, you're pretty much just playing MIDI samples with MIDI, or maybe a synthesizer, whatever. But sample, you can get pretty far with samples. And so the idea in that context was that, for example, like, you could change tempo freely, right? And I designed it so that there's a sequencer in there, works kind of like how you need animation playback systems to function, where, if you think of time like this, and if tempo is higher, if you have a higher tempo, time squeezes, right? So if you're playing something and you change the tempo, you probably experience this in a DAW. If you change the tempo, your whole MIDI thing is going to go accordion, right? But instead, if you keep your cursor where now is, and the step from now forward is incremental, or independent of time, right? It's what's the word I'm looking for? Anyway, it's a fraction or whatever. You can change tempo at any point, and it just changes the rate at which you change from there forward. So you can change tempo freely in this system, right? There's no accordioning except for from there forward, and forward hasn't happened yet. So it's just the next step, the next delta, for lack of a better way of putting it. And so it's wildly flexible and dynamic in that way. I did use it in Alyx a little bit, but I ended up not really exercising it. Like, if I were to go back, I'd just use tracks, because I thought I would kind of dig in deep and really exercise this idea more, but there just wasn't the need for the dynamism that other game had. So it's easier just to play layers and tracks, So that's what that is. Yeah. It's still there. In Source 2, it's sitting there. I'm the only one who attempts to. I have a giant, sticky notes that are on your desktop. I have a giant list of a to-do list, and one of them is to merge the track system with the sequencer MIDI stuff, because they're kind of the same thing. They both have a lot of the same features. It's just then, the MIDI thing should just be a feature of tracks, and I just didn't. I wanted to design it clean. It's super efficient for what it does, and so yeah.
That's interesting.
We have a bunch of new tools too, but I'm sure that's not actually why I'm here. It's to, like, groups. The groups system is really amazing. Yeah.
Group system.
Yeah, I'm big on systems, platforms. So that, and I design them, obviously at this point, if you haven't figured it out, like super extensible, like making them super duper extensible, and hopefully relatively easy for the artist to use. Like sound events, you can just use the sound event, and they've got fields that you change. One step back from that is you've got the stack, which you can actually go in and change those pretty easily too. You just have to kind of be able to read the existing stack and know, or you can import a stack and, wire in and out of it, right? So that's right there is a level of expandability that's pretty deep, without having to compile anything. You don't have to. There's no code, right? There's no scripting. I mean, unless you view making a stack as scripting. And then, from there you can make your own nodes. You got to write C++ to make your own nodes, but they're pretty straightforward. They're designed to be pretty easy to use or to write. Anyway, so the idea is that and so groups is basically a system that handles, like right now, if you were to do limiting in a system, it's gonna go, like, a stack is gonna run and say, hey, like, search for how many of sound event type X is in here, and it's gonna kind of do some matching across every sound event that's playing in the list, right? And then the next one that does it's going to do the same thing, and it's really inefficient. And instead, groups are it's a thing sitting there, kind of like mixed groups. We have a bunch of systems like that sit and do things that the operators poke into and pull from. And this one is sound events sign up for groups, and those groups can hold any number of sound events and manage them, obviously, like limiting or blocking or any of those sorts of basic voice management functionality. But then there are other. It's a platform. It's a design surface. So other artists have now started adding their own groups that do their own special things, like HDR management, all those sorts of things. And that's the beauty of any open system like that, is that at this point we have artists that are making things that are way cooler than I am. Yeah.
You've got more people making music stuff,
Audio stuff, yeah. Not a lot of music stuff. I'm still kind of the primary person driving that stuff forward, but I'm sure eventually someone will start to dig in and do that too.
I mean, except for more VR stuff, which I think you already talked a lot about. I think that's it with the questions, which I'm very happy with.
Oh, cool.
Last time we went out of time.
I hope I didn't go too deep.
I also had to debug sound stuff. Mainly just learning the system, not really debugging. If it was debugging, it was because of our own fault.
Yeah, well, and especially in that Portal 2 system, and specifically, like, I did communicate people, and maybe you were one of them, I don't remember, but people emailed me directly, and I would spend a lot of time trying to help them figure out, because the thing is when you're, and this exists now in Alyx. I mean, we remodeled our kitchen upstairs, right, kind of, a year into COVID or something. And I designed it and modded it up in VR with using the Alyx tool set, right? And I have full access, right? But to use the mod system, it was way easier just to go into the public facing version of the tool. And so I am familiar with what that feels like. And Portal 2 was similar. And what ends up happening is when I try and help people kind of navigate, say, Portal 2 or whatever, I have to I have to go into their access space, the scope of what their access is, and kind of figure out, like, okay, well, here's the thing you're trying to do, but the system's only going to allow you to do X, Y, and Z. And therefore, it's mostly navigating that, right? Like, if you want to overwrite a game sound, I think in Portal 2 parlance, it was probably sound events by then. But they're like, someone just wrote me recently, and I was like, I think you might have to name it the same as an existing sound event. Like, you can't create a new one. Maybe you have to overwrite one. I don't know. But, there's just this extra layer of complexity that happens because of the narrowing of scope, right? And so that's always a little bit of a challenge. And I, like I said, I experienced it mocking up my kitchen in the Alyx.
That seems to be a thing Valve people do, because I think um,
I know Kelly Bailey
the
designed his house in Hammer.
The Team
Yeah.
Fortress guy, Robin Walker, in the Valve thing also said he did that.
Yeah.
You guys
Oh,
often
and
do that.
well, and VR was great because we kind of have a narrow space, and I was able to, just put the rig on, and I could reach out. You know what I mean? I could go, oh, there's the counter, there's the other counter. Is it too narrow? Is it wide enough? And then what I did is I made this map that had like I could make I made 6 different versions of the kitchen, and then I put my wife in there, and she'd go from I like that one, but it was great. It was really fun. And it was pandemic too, so it was lots of time to mess around like that. But like I'm a big fan of modding and modders, and usually will try pretty hard to help out if I can. Lately, Portal 2 stuff's hard just because it's too long. I don't remember anymore, like especially those specifics of how do you go alter this thing. Because there's also anti-cheat. Like music packs are a thing in CS, and there was for a long time I could have artists test their own music packs in CS on a public facing, in Steam. As long as you didn't go to a server, you wouldn't get VAC banned. You know what I mean? It's like you just had to stay local only. But then they made a change at one point that was anti-cheat, and it just like I tried everything to figure out how to have artists be able to test their work locally, and the anti-cheat stuff they implemented, just and you can't argue with that. You know what I mean? It's like so yeah, it's just it's kind of part of the game too, right? Like I mean, even in-house being a game designer it's not like woohoo walk in the park. It's sort of like the inside of the Pyro's his little candy land. It's like making games is hard.
Yeah, it's always underestimated. You always underestimate how hard it is.
Yeah.
Now, last time when we were chatting, we were just crunching or finishing Revolution, and I think Jared, you started. Did you already start working on the ending boss fight music, or was that after October?
I think it must have been after.
I think so too, because after that I was like, okay, he just got Mike to make the music.
Oh, really?
I keep complimenting you with that, Jared, because like normally, your music in Revolution has such an interesting and like it's a mixture of the existing, like of Mike's sound. It's got some Kelly sound, and of course your own voice. But with that ending, I was just like, it sounds exactly like Portal 2. How the hell did you manage to replicate it?
I do apologize. I can't. I need to go play it, and I will make a point of paying attention in the final boss fight. And I'm sure the music must be out there available too.
Yes, you can buy the soundtrack on Steam.
Of course you can. Good. You should be able to. Yeah. Well, congratulations on that. And I apologize. I meant to play before today, but it's my kids are finally almost out of the house, and I spend my days at the computer, so I don't play as many games as I once did, for sure.
I mean, I would be very honored if you play it, for sure.
Yeah. Oh no, like I said, in the building, people are fans for sure. When it came out, I heard all about it. Yeah.
It's good to note. That's so fun, because you never hear anything from Valve ever. It's I mean, I also don't check my emails. I think I'm getting the DNA a bit.
Well, yeah. I mean, the danger is like, I do this interview, and like tomorrow there could be like Mike Morasky says something out of context, and
ex-Valve, no, not ex-App.
Yeah, soon to be ex-Valve employee.
Soon to be former ex-Valve employee. Yeah.
Well, I hope I answered all your questions. I'm glad you didn't ask a bunch of really Portal 2 era specific ones because I was trying to review in my mind. Like there's some stuff that's pretty opaque in there, you know. I mean, in the stacks, like because you know stuff does go inside of a operator. Like playing a sound back then still was playing it in source one. You know what I mean? And even the sound mixer system and you know the DSP, all that stuff was still very source one. And so I don't remember really. There were some tricks there for sure. In fact, there's also a bunch of stuff in that game where you know the other thing you run into a lot that game in particular I did a lot of tricks is things like, you know, when you fall down and get into the I forget what the you know the thing that carries you in the
excursion funnel.
Excursion funnel, thank you.
Or just funnel.
Is you know it was like the maps are changing fast enough. We didn't really have layers yet, I don't think. And so to detect that you were entering the excursion funnel and play the music, I actually used mix layers to tell me when the entering the excursion funnel sound played and use that to trigger the music, right? So there's a lot of kind of weird backhandy tricks in that game that I used mostly to navigate in-house workflow issues and, you know, and just survive, just get the game done and out the door. And that stuff that happens a lot less now because even Hammer has progressed, you know, immensely since then. And even since Alyx, Half-Life Alyx has come out. So, yeah, but again, like I said, it's making games. I got to do what you got to do sometimes.
Yeah. Last time I teased you with Neon Prime, which we now know is Deadlock.
Yeah, which is amazing. What a great project. Yeah, what a cool project.
I've not played much of it. Like it is very lane MOBA-esque, which is totally not my cup of tea.
And it's got a crazy, you know, progression tree and all, you know, level tree, all that kind of stuff. And so skill tree, I guess is the right word for it. It would consume. I didn't play Dota. I started to play Dota and I was like, I can't, I'll just I'll lose my entire life to this game if I do it.
Yep.
I was a big D&D nut when I was young, and I know that I'm compulsive enough that I would end up just not ever doing anything else. Same, and Deadlock's kind of similar in that way, but a little more TF fun, you know, from the little bit that I've been playing. But yeah,
it does feel like it's kind of trying to mix every Valve game into one, you know, stir it around. Maybe except for Portal, it doesn't really have puzzle mechanics, I think, but because
you said you did VFX for the Matrix.
Yeah, although I have a playtest in like 2 minutes, so if we start talking about the Matrix films, that's another 3-hour podcast, you know.
No, I'm really happy that we went under time.
Quite all right.
Time. Yeah. Awesome. Thanks again so much.
Right on. Well, I'm glad we could finally do this.
Finally.
Yeah.
I did not flake. Like that's all that matters.
It was also me. I just didn't redo it. My email settings. I don't know what's up with that. I fixed it.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, because I offered a while back, but yeah. It's all right. There's another guy who does a cool podcast that does like your whole life, and I was like, well, dude, I got to find 3 hours somehow. Like, I will do it. I told him I'd do it eventually, but you know, finding that, you know, this amount of time in a day can be kind of hard.
Yeah.
All right, you guys. Great talking
Thanks so much.
Yep. Yeah. Thanks.
Awesome. I'm gonna send this to you then. See ya.
All right, and I'll play Revolution and get back to you.
Yes, that's the playtest.
Yeah. How long is it? Was it like 5 hours or something like that?
7. It's about
5 to 7.
Yeah.
I tend to be slow with those puzzle games, so
it's actually
7
almost the same length as Portal 2.
Oh, okay.
Depends on how fast you play, of course.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Great talking to you.
Right.
You too. See ya.